What's going on?
Good morning, pale nerds. You have been awoken because we have detected an unusual planet in the nearby vicinity.
Excellent work, Commander Chimpo. We must begin exploration of this planet immediately.
Okay. Should we wake more people, or do some low orbit, like, flybys first, or... This just seems a little reckless is all.
What could possibly go wrong? Oh god, he's dead! He's dead! Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is the Top 10 Xenomorphs. So we haven't talked about the Alien franchise before, and it's about high time that we did. Because I want to, and I love this franchise, and with a long history of comic book adaptations, some of which are excellent by the way, it feels suitable to talk about this franchise a little bit more, and we're going to start by doing this. Be warned, there are spoilers ahead for pretty much every Alien film and lots of other stories with these creatures in video games and comic books, so just sort of keep that in mind, especially for the movies Prometheus and Alien Covenant, whose role in the franchise wound up being a big part of the discussion in this video. In fact, I kind of centered a lot of the content around that discussion. There's been a lot of talk about these new ones this year, and I have my own opinions on the matter. So with all that in mind, let's begin with number 10, Praetorian and Palatine Xenomorphs. We start off with a pretty interesting version of the Xenomorph, although the differences between them and the original are very slight, so it isn't about to get any higher on this top 10. The Praetorian is one of the final stages of the Xenomorph proper, or at least that's the fan theory. The idea is it shows up on worlds where their kind has existed for a long time, and have either grown to a sufficient size from the classic version, or have been the result of eggs specifically created by more powerful versions of the Xenomorph Queen. I'm being vague and pointing out multiple potential origins for these creatures because it's never exactly been firmly established. Different source materials kind of say different things on these creatures. Fan theories go in both directions as well. Part of the issue behind this is story reasons. The exact specifics of these creatures aren't well understood because they're so powerful and function on such a developed xenomorph world that by the time they show up, few are around to witness it and live to tell the tale. Their design is neat as well, just basically being a buffed up version of the original xenomorph and slightly looking more and more like a queen as they develop. In the comics, they've also introduced the Palatine line. It's similar, but even further developed than the Praetorian. The Queen Mother, as sort of high-level ultimate leader of the Xenomorph, which has really only been seen once or twice in the comics, seems to create these creatures to guard herself, either birthing or elevating Praetorian-level aliens into the Palatines. These are giant versions of the Praetorian species that seem to be about the size of the Queens. So they are quite powerful, as you might imagine. All of this has barely been explored in any real detail, and is pretty heavy material to start out with for alien novices. I would caution against assuming all of this is totally canon either, depending on how important such things are to you. But in a big franchise like this, you kind of just have to take with you the stuff you like. I personally like these creatures. The idea of them shows how little we really know of the Xenomorphs and how they function on a long-term basis or a wider scale. Xenomorphs further developing and becoming more complex and larger as they spread over a planet. Perhaps I'm the only one who cares about the fictional creature's hypothetical biology. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I am the only person who cares about the fictional creature's hypothetical biology. Number 9. The Deccan Sharks. This might seem like a silly idea, but was executed surprisingly well in the incredibly good Dark Horse series of comics called Prometheus, Fire and Stone. A follow-up story to Prometheus, a team of explorers returned to that same moon visited by the original expedition long after the events of the film Prometheus. After so much time, that world has been deeply altered. Life is now grown out of control thanks to the effects of the secret of the Ivan Ooze. Among the various creatures that have been created on this world are these motherfuckers. Likely the result of small fish that existed on this planet before, but much like the alien wiener snakes of Prometheus, they've evolved into these monstrosities thanks to the black ooze. Though clearly a species distinct from the xenomorph proper, the similarities are undeniable. We don't see them a lot in Fire and Stone, but I think they're a great idea. They combine all the horror of open water, sharks, and xenomorphs into one horrible creature. And something really iconic and terrifying emerges as a result of it. I think about how we aren't as mobile in the water and can't breathe under it. And that's the reason a lot of people get unnerved by deep waters to begin with. The whole idea of an unknown lying below that you can't see. And that if you get pulled down by this crazy creature, like you're just gonna either drown or be eaten alive. Both of which just sound horrible. It's great. They're great. Number 8. The Predalians. The Predator Aliens. The Predalians, I hate that name, are the somewhat infamous result of the xenomorph growing out of a predator. They are the star of the finest film ever made, Alien vs. Predator Requiem. Okay, look, that movie does suck, but that's that special kind of suck that I just can't help but profoundly enjoy. It's stupid, it doesn't at all live up to its potential, and I had a lot of fun watching it in spite of all of that. It basically takes the Alien franchise but puts it in the setting of a trashy slasher flick, taking place in the present day for the first time ever with xenomorphs on film, and unleashing them on an otherwise ordinary American town. That's a cool idea, and I can excuse a lot of silliness because of it. A lot. Like, so much silliness, so much stupid scenes and dialogue, because, it's fun. The Predalien itself is a good example of having fun with your insane crossover film series, and not taking things so seriously that you get in the way of said fun, which is my general sentiment of Requiem as well. But Requiem's only part of the reason I chose to include this version of the Xenomorph. They don't actually originate from the films, and have a long history in the Dark Horse comics and video games. Those adaptations are a big part of why I really liked the idea of the creature to begin with, and was a factor in including this in the top 10. They have been used well in the games to ramp up the danger of both the Predators and Xenomorphs, just like the Praetorians, and they've led to some very cool action sequences. They really nailed the design of the Predalien too. It's a cool and vicious opponent, towering over predators, aliens, and humans easily. Requiem also gave the creature a subtle but, I think, excellent little feature with that tail that can be used as a club, rather than the more blade-like tail of pretty much every other Xenomorph. Plus, she had a lot of fun with that pregnant woman. Okay, let's just move on. Number 7. Tarkatan Xenomorphs. So, this is just about one of the coolest things ever. The end result of a xenomorph growing inside of a Tarkatan from Mortal Kombat's Outworld. Tarkatan Xenomorphs were an awesome idea for bringing the Xenomorphs into Mortal Kombat 10 as a DLC character, while keeping the idea fresh and different from just about any other Xenomorph showing up in a video game. The best part is they gave them the extendable arm blades famous from the Tarkatans, giving them a really distinct weapon and advantage in close combat compared to other members of their species and the related creatures we're talking about today. Seriously, out of any of the cross-species Xenomorphs we've ever seen, the Tarkatans really bring something extra to the creature, and that, I think, is really cool. They're well designed, they look great in both cutscenes and combat, and even have different variations that take advantage of various Xenomorph traits. It was a simple idea and nothing new in a world where Predaliens are old news, but man, this is a great example of the fun you can have with Xenomorphs and other franchises. Number 6. Deacon. Next up is Deacon, this little fellow that popped out of the engineer at the end of Prometheus. Now I know he barely appeared in that film, but don't worry. If that's all you know Deacon for, I've got a hell of a story to tell you. So I've already mentioned Fire and Stone and how awesome it is, right? Well, I didn't talk about that much other than the world of Prometheus being changed a lot in that story, there were some weird fish monsters, and a rescue team was investigating what happened to the Prometheus crew. The idea is that the Ivan ooze is what changed this moon so much by the time of Fire and Blood. Life grew at this uncontrollable rate, and by the time a rescue team arrives, it's a world overrun by the likes of full-blooded xenomorphs that crash-landed on a planet, native creatures like the Deccan Sharks, and even one very annoyed recently reawoken engineer. As you might imagine, chaos ensues. Tons of people die, the predators get roped into the story, and a whole bunch of crazy awesome stuff happens. Seriously, I highly recommend Fire and Stone. If you don't take anything else away from this video, it's that this comic series is worth reading. So at one point during this story, a scientist has the bright idea of injecting the black pudding into a construct named Arden. Constructs are these artificial intelligences along the lines of Walter and David from the movies, but made with organic instead of synthetic components. And yes, as you can imagine, the monster mash, which grows all biology out of control and has these crazy effects on people, has a pretty insane effect on a construct. Arden becomes this skinless abomination, driving him completely insane, and giving him this weirdly cooperative relationship with the Xenomorphs, which I would actually kind of compare to David's relationship with the creatures in Covenant. Now over time, Arden calms down a bit and starts to work with some of the other survivors to take refuge in a strange mountain that has been a physical geographical feature throughout Fire and Stone, kind of just in the background for the entirety of these comics. The other Xenomorphs seem to avoid it, while it has an odd effect on various characters when they are near the mountain or within one of its caves. With Arden, the survivors are able to dig into the mountain after they discover that Prometheus is somehow emitting a signal deep within it. Still curious about what happened to the ship, even after all the crazy stuff that's happened, they burrow their way inside only to find rivers of acid. The whole thing nearly kills the entire group, but they manage to push past these acidic rivers that apparently run throughout the entire mountain. The team work their way towards the Prometheus signal. When they finally reach it, Arden discovers that Deacon, that alien that grew out of the engineer, found itself trapped inside the ship, with only a massive canister of the black goo that the crew had brought on earlier to feed itself. So it consumed the ooze, growing and growing and growing, until it eventually encompassed the entire ship and began growing around it too. Eventually, the entire creature became the mountain itself, an unending mess of growth that might one day consume the entire moon itself. It's a hell of an ending for Deacon and has very serious implications for the unstoppable potential of this Goku Black substance. Fire and Stone is really interesting overall, but those final revelations are done really well and stuck with me in a big way. Fire and Stone ends as Arden merges with Deacon, their final fate really unknown, but the others are given safe passage because of this, and everyone does ultimately survive this encounter. Early plans for Fire and Stone involved more Deacons, setting themselves up as a sort of race before that idea was discarded. What we got instead was way more original and interesting, if you ask me. It was something I didn't expect and adds a lot to the mythology of the Alien franchise. Deacon is neat. There may never well be another creature like him born. He is born from a very uniquely created giant facehugger under circumstances never likely to happen again, and then was hatched out of an engineer. And the whole thing is a very unlikely series of circumstances. So the chance of a Deacon ever being born again is very slim next to impossible. As both an early version of the Xenomorph, where you can see similarities but it possesses unique features that left a strong impression on it, and as a weird, lonely mountain destined to grow forever and potentially overtake the entire moon, Deacon is one of the coolest Xenomorphs to have ever lived. Number 5. The Protomorph. Yes, so it is here that we officially get into Covenant territory. There's no word on the Xenomorph at the end of Alien Covenant's exact classification as a species. It's kind of why I wanted to make this list. I wanted to look into this matter and see if I could find an answer. It sure looks a lot like the original Xenomorph, with only slight, barely noticeable differences in appearance that could easily be chalked up to aesthetic choices from the visual effects department. They're also hatched from eggs and facehuggers that seem identical to the original Alien films. Yet among fans it's become almost commonly accepted that this particular species appears to be a slightly imperfect version of the Xenomorph, especially compared to the creature depicted in the original Alien film, hence the name Protomorph. I did as much research as one can possibly do into a fictional creature, and have decided the weight of evidence supports the notion that this alien is indeed best referred to and thought of as a protomorph rather than a full-blooded xenomorph. It has many qualities of the original Xenomorph, but behaves in subtle little ways that show it's not exactly on the level of its original counterpart. It acts a lot less stealthily, outright attacking the cargo loader, and directly attacking a crane arm instead of the person operating that crane arm, both of which really don't fit with the smarter, more hunter-like alien we see in the original movie. That crane bit in particular is significant, since the original Xenomorph very much was able to make the distinction between operator and machine, which is really smart when we think about it. The chestburster specimen looks and behaves quite differently than the original too, and it could easily be explained as a different creature because of it, and it's very difficult to believe Ridley Scott didn't remember what the original chestburster looked like. And I think more importantly than anything, it fits the content of the story too. The whole point of Covenant is dealing with the horror show of David's ongoing experiments, after all. And the Protomorph very much represents the slow transition of creatures we see that David has been trying to perfect into this ultimate predator, or something along those lines. This movie isn't perfect, which is why we don't really have a firm answer on this, but I did enjoy it more than I didn't. And the idea of these creatures being slowly pulled towards Xenomorphs is interesting, although we'll get more into how I feel about this in a second. The way I see it, we are presented with two scenarios. Either A, Ridley Scott forgot vital details of the original movie that he directed, or B, this was an intentional choice fitting in with the themes and narrative of the film as presented. Scenario B just seems a lot more likely to me. I think it's a neat idea too, still a very dangerous creature, but not quite the refined beast we see in the original film. It also nicely explains David's behavior on the Covenant. He was testing his new creature. After all, if it was his perfect experiment, it should be able to kill Daniels and Tennessee. I can't believe I remembered those names. And when it failed, rather miserably, he was visibly disappointed. This is why he happily looks forward to experimenting with the colony and the planet they are heading towards. He still has work to do and improvements to be made. Critics of Covenant will argue the Protomorph, by token of its origins, ruins the Alien franchise because it means David created the aliens, and that's dumb. In my view, David's claims to being a god should be viewed as hollow and indicative of how far he has gone. He can't even get quotes straight anymore. That was a really important point in the movie, by the way. I love that setup and payoff, and signifies that David isn't some evil genius, more along the lines of an out-of-control, broken AI, fumbling with a biological technology he does not fully understand nor comprehend the purpose of. The engineers clearly knew about the Xenomorphs long before the events of the Prometheus movie, either as a potential misuse of the black goo, or a certain evolutionary inevitability through the use of the mysterious substance they seem to have made extensive use of. We don't know why or what they are doing, but that's kind of the whole point of the franchise, right? We don't know exactly why the engineers are doing this or what the point of the Xenomorphs are, but that's the point. It's an alien, a strange, unknown creature hunting you down in the night. The Protomorph doesn't really change any of that. It just adds to the story a little bit and contributes to things more than it damages it, in my opinion. It provides a piece to a greater puzzle, but a puzzle that Ridley Scott is still smart enough to leave unclear. That's why I think there's value to this, and I sort of went out of my way to talk a little bit more about the Protomorph here. A more original and important contribution than the goofier crossover stuff, easily, but it should be noted, not as groundbreaking and formative as some of the other creatures we're about to talk about. Like I said, Covenant isn't perfect, and I wish the Protomorph was a little more proto in its design, a little more imperfect to signal that we're not quite at the full-blooded Xenomorph yet. It's debatable if this is even different from the original because it so barely changes the formula, but sometimes the subtle differences can mean more to a creature's history and its origins, and that's why I think this creature's worth talking about and being a part of this franchise. Indeed, you can kind of say that about Alien Covenant itself. Number 4. Runners. The Runners are a slightly modified version of the Xenomorph grown inside of a dog host instead of a human. The concept was first introduced in the movie Alien Q. A weird but mostly good entry into the franchise, and also introduced the notion that slightly different Xenomorphs are born out of different hosts. That idea was great and has been used with other alien races and creatures to great effect since then. It even led to this whole line of alien species based on different types of animals, which were released for a series of action figures at one point during this franchise's history. A lot of them look really cool in their design and reflect the xenomorph qualities quite well in different types of animals. Although none of those have ever been used in any meaningful effect and does only get an honorable mention here. The runner was a particularly good design too. Since the creature carries a lot of that film, it retains a lot of the intimidation factor of the original Alien. But they preserve a lot of what makes the original Xenomorph scary in the runner, and that's a good thing. Doing so was critical in making the runner in Alien Cubed as much of a threat as the Xenomorphs are in any other movie. And that's why it gets to have moments like this, one of the most well-remembered and regarded moments in the entire franchise. I mean, enough said, right? Number 3. Neomorphs. This form is very creative, with one of the most original designs in the entire franchise. The more squishy and moldy skin, without the hardened endoskeleton typical to the other xenomorph-type creatures, really worked well in Covenant and just in making these creatures different and scary. Every scene with the Neomorphs stood out to me, and they were excellent additions to the franchise. As the monsters that carried the bulk of this film, their part in it was so good, and definitely my absolute favorite. I like the way their mouth pops open seemingly out of nowhere, the brutal nature of that birth cycle. And overall, these creatures represent one of my favorite interpretations of this xenomorph ever. This whole sequence in the medbay was amazing. Easily one of the best in the franchise. But every single moment stands out to me as utterly exceptional. They're bloody, creepy, and brilliant. Every aspect of the Neomorph just screams alien. They were very cool, and one of the very best, next to, of course, the classics. Number 2. Queens, Empresses, and the Queen Mother. Well, I feel this was pretty much always a given, at least as far as the Queen species is concerned. I included the Empresses and Queen Mother from the larger series Apocrypha because they're pretty much the same idea of the original, just scaled up as the rate and spread of the Xenomorphs increases across the planet, or in the case of the Queen Mother, the entire galaxy. That's a cool idea, but it's the Queen that is the truly important aspect of the Alien franchise. A valuable addition from James Cameron's Aliens, one of the many things he did well and brought to the franchise. In doing so, he expanded the whole life cycle of the Xenomorphs and elaborated on their organization in larger groups beyond the behavior of a lone hunter. The Queens were the first real step in expanding the Alien movie into a verifiable franchise, with all the pros and cons that accompany it. And sure, while it resulted in some silly moments along the way, Colonial Marines, it did lead to some pretty awesome beats throughout Alien history. Yes, Aliens was cool, but I also loved that big fight in Alien vs. Predator and that ice base with that Queen. They did a great job at conveying this version of the alien's massive size and power. As dated as those effects might be, that was a lot of fun. The Empress is basically when a queen controls an entire planet's worth of xenomorphs, and the Queen Mother is thought to basically control all the xenomorphs in a galaxy. They're pretty cool too, and I like the idea of this escalation, just like with the Praetorians and the Palatines. Of course, none of this holds a candle to Aliens, which features the Queen in a number of classic scenes, including what is one of the greatest moments in all of film history.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Number 1. Drones and Warriors. So thus we come to the end of our top 10, and surprising nobody, it was always basically going to be these guys. To date, nothing really tops the original Xenomorph, and I was always envisioning these guys being at the very top. I mean, how could I not? For the record, drones are the fan term for the original Xenomorph, that featured a smooth, reflective head that kind of made the Xenomorph famous in that first movie. Warriors refer to the slightly different versions that first appeared in the movie Aliens. They lack that top bit on their heads. The difference is small and not terribly significant, and was actually done last minute in the production of Aliens because the reflective tops were posing a lot of potential danger in filming certain scenes in that movie. I'll be honest, if you ever actually noticed it without having been told about it first when watching either of these movies, then kudos to you because you are a lot more observant than I ever was. Over time, this limitation is no longer in place, as technology and special effects makes the point moot. But both versions have appeared across the franchise rather indiscriminately. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Alien vs. Predator had the drones, Requiem had the warriors. At this point, there's no sense in trying to come up for an explanation with it, you just kinda gotta go with the flow. There is some speculation that it fits into this evolutionary line. You start out with drones, get up to warriors, then get into Praetorians and that sort of thing. That's very speculative, and like I said, doesn't fit with the franchise and what we've seen. But if you ask me, it's also irrelevant. Both versions are great. Both show nearly identical behavior and capabilities, and both pretty much get at the original horror and power that the Xenomorphs represent rather perfectly. It's just such a crazy good a design for any alien. Enough that it's basically what's been keeping this franchise going and will go for many years forward. Is there any better example out of this in fiction? I am really asking because I couldn't really think of any. H.R. Giger's designs are insane, to the extent that it's really hard to compare to any other alien. And when I say insane, I of course mean insanely good. No other creature so consistently sticks in people's heads or gets under their skin the way Xenomorphs do. Their oddly sexual design with strong male and female features, their drool mixing in with a vicious behavior, and complete lack of motivation beyond killing, surviving, and if possible, expanding their numbers. But it's not a zero-sum game to them. They'll happily kill to oblivion, even if it means this particular creature will be wiped out without any kin to lead on its progeny. They don't seem to care about that. They're creepy, and since the very first movie, and because of this behavior, have long been implied to have been designed in some form or another as this sort of unstoppable killing machine, rather than the product of natural evolution. I prefer the stories that actually say the aliens are designed, because the intent and purpose of which is what's mysterious and creepy, but the design as a killing machine is kind of clearly there. How they behave, how they breed, and the whole thing doesn't really fit in with the natural evolutionary process. How could something like this survive indefinitely? We've seen some of that in the Alien franchise, but the thing that makes more sense to me, and is a core part of that first Alien movie, is that they were created, not born.
Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
Like I said, that's not something that was invented for these new movies. This is a huge core part of the Alien franchise, and part of the reason why I excuse a lot out of Covenant more than I let the stuff that bothers me bother me. It's always been one of the most interesting aspects of these creatures to me. They don't seem to exist to live like other life forms, or to create a sort of equilibrium with their ecosystem. They'll kill and kill and kill until there's nothing left. And then presumably they'll just go into this inert state in those eggs like we saw in that very first movie. We just see this ship and this creature and we have no idea what the story is, where these creatures came from, or what's going on. Our very first glimpse of them is the end product of their behavior. A dead world with nothing on it.
So that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Let me know if there's any Xenomorphs you felt I left out, or ones that should have been higher or lower on the list. It's an interesting discussion worth having, and I really like this franchise and talking about it. On that note, if there's any other videos based on aliens or predators, by all means, if you have suggestions, leave them in the comments section below. Otherwise, special thanks to our patrons. If you'd like to support us making more content, that's a great way to help out. You can find the link in the video description as well. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.